volunteers and advocates who turn progressive ideas into action. We are inspired by Jewish values. We strive for social justice by improving the quality of life for women, children, families, and by safeguarding these individual rights and freedoms. This organization is over 100 years old, and lo, for these many years, we have worked for advancing the well-being and the status of women, for advancing the well-being of children and families, for enhancing the quality of Jewish life, and for ensuring and advancing individual and civil rights. Our mission to advance the well-being of children, families, women, while advancing individual and civil rights is a perfect segue into the program that we're presenting this evening on juvenile prostitution. Before I go on, though, I would like to remind you that if you like what you see, if you like what you hear, please join us. Even though our title is National Council of Jewish Women, we are really an equal opportunity employer or organization, as the case may be. You don't have to be Jewish. You don't have to be a female. You just need to be someone who really wants to be at the forefront of social change by helping us put our beliefs into practice. There's a membership table in the lobby. There are people here who will help you. And for some of you, you might find this a very gratifying experience. I need to take a disclaimer. Last month, we had an educational on bullying. And at the end of the educational, I announced that we would be having our next meeting on prostitution. So if some of you are here because you decided to find out how, I'm inviting you to stick around. You might learn more than you had bargained for. This program would never have been possible without the hard work and dedication of our board member, Jennifer Baranoff. Where is Jen? She really put this program together single-handedly, and we are very, very grateful to her. I would also like to thank our Director of Advocacy, Ruth Williams, for her tireless effort in guiding and directing our advocacy committee. We are very honored to have in our audience tonight Mr. Michael Corey Davis. Stand up. For those of you who don't know Michael, he is the award-winning filmmaker of Cargo: Innocence Lost. He also wrote the film Svetlana's Journey, which I happened to catch one evening just by chance. And it won the Hollywood Film Festival Award for the best short film on the true story of a 13-year-old sex trafficking victim he met while he was in Bulgaria. Michael has traveled all over the world, from the White House to Dubai, to bring the issue of human trafficking to light. And I have to say that my first exposure was a conference at UCLA years ago where I met Maria, who now works for us, and became totally involved with the whole issue of human trafficking. The format for tonight's program will be as follows. You're going to see a 20-minute film called Carissa, which will help you understand the magnitude of the juvenile prostitution problem. Immediately after the film, we will have our panel members come to the stage to engage in a conversation about the problems of juvenile prostitution and hopefully that we can do something about it. On your seats, you're going to find a lot of paper. Now, it doesn't soften the seat, but hopefully what it'll do is, it will, first of all, it gives you the bios of all the people who are going to be on our panel, and then It gives you an opportunity to write questions if you have a pen and some cards, because we will be answering questions at the end of the panel discussion. And then we ask you please to take a couple of minutes to evaluate our program. We really value your opinion, and when we plan our other programs, we use these as guidelines. So without further ado, we are going to start our film called Carissa.
To get going on hearing from them. I think, Carissa, it only makes sense to kind of start with you. And I wonder if you could tell us what life, from morning to night is like for kids who are on the street.
Oh, okay. So, is this on, maybe?
No. On the back.
Hi, David was here. Is he still here? The filmmaker? Yeah? David, can you stand up? That was his first film, and I think he did an amazing job. And I was really lucky and fortunate that he was at Anderson School with me and in my same little tiny group. And that really relates back to what you asked, because I think when I was on the streets, I was very fortunate and I was very blessed, and I think a lot of the kids that I hung out with weren't so fortunate and weren't so blessed. I, would miraculously, I guess, get out of situations. Some of them could have destroyed me and I know killed me, and everything from, being fed drugs and alcohol so people could take advantage of you. My body used to react to stress, and probably still would if I was under that stress, with hives. So whatever you have, if you're a kid, you have a medical issue, maybe like asthma or hives or whatever autoimmune thing you have going on, if you're on the streets and the stress of not knowing where you're going to sleep or where you're going to eat, and then men trying to, have sex with you or exploit you, and you will have that manifest. You know what I mean? And I think as adults, we all know how stress manifests, and for kids that really can't process any of it, it's a very confusing. And I don't know, examples of trying to find food. I would clean people's houses for like a box of macaroni and cheese, and I would feel so grateful if they would give me their leftovers. And I knew from like word on the street where to get fresh food out of garbage cans, and so like donut shops were good in the morning, and they would throw out old stuff from the night before or whatever. And then it was panhandling, a lot of panhandling, and then you would meet strangers who would quickly see that you were vulnerable and exploit you. And it happened a lot. And I think when I first started this project, I remembered the big things like I see, and then as I kind of cleared my memory of those big memories, and as my therapist would say, kind of like let that beach ball come up, then another one, then another one would come up. And so it happened pretty consistently that there was always someone there to exploit you. You wouldn't imagine. I mean, there wasn't always someone there to help you. Even though I would go through the system, I would be in juvenile hall, I'd be in and out of juvenile hall. For a couple of years, Ron was really the first person that asked me what happened to me on the streets. Everyone else just assumed they knew, and they assumed it was my fault. And now that I'm learning more about psychology and how to deal with troubled youth, I understand that those were good people, and that it's really difficult if you're not trained to, sorry about this, to resist being pulled into the conflict and going into a conflict cycle. So basically what happens is like, I'm mean to a counselor or to somebody who's trying to help me, because my first response to the judge, I'm sure you guys have seen this in the courtroom, is kind of F you and forget you, and my attitude's really, I really put up a strong attitude against people helping me, and then what happens is they kind of mirror that behavior, and then it escalates. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and so I was really mean to a lot of people who wanted to help me. It didn't make sense, and then I would be really nice to a lot of people who wanted to hurt me, because they scared me, So we really have to look deeper at this than just the surface. That's kind of my advice. I was a mean kid. I got in lots of fights. I turned away from people who wanted to help me. I turned towards people who wanted to hurt me, and I checked out with drugs and alcohol.
What do you tell the kids that you work with when you speak at juvenile halls and work with kids who are where you were all those years ago?
Yeah, I think all of us are different how we could contribute to where kids are, but I just try to meet them where they're at. You know, I was lucky enough to go to LA Youth Network and have a group of kids. Basically, when they first got there, they thought they were held hostage. They were like, they don't want to stay there and watch a movie and listen to somebody talk to them. And then by the time I left, we were friends. You know, we talked, I got invited to a graduation, and I think that's what I try to be. I try to be there in the moment with them, wherever that is, because I don't think they have enough people doing that, because it's scary what they're going through, and we don't have all the answers. We don't. I mean, the young man who graduated, I mean, we don't know where he's going to live. So, but he's going to have lunch with me tomorrow.
So, Fagwa, tell us about the kids that you encounter at Children of the Night.
I can go off of one of the kids that Carissa actually mentors from San Diego. I don't know if you remember her. It wasn't too long ago. She called our hotline. Children of the Night has a 24-hour hotline, and it's 1-800. We had a kid who Carissa was mentoring, and Carissa has been to Children of the Night several times on many occasions, so she's familiar with our program and the work that we do. So this kid who called us, I believe she was either 16 or 17 years old. She called us from Las Vegas. She was originally from San Diego. She went to Las Vegas with this pimp. She was raped and beaten up by this customer that she was with. She called our hotline after she checked into a emergency room, and she was speaking with Carissa, and Carissa or the social worker at the time called Children of the Night, and I actually was a hotline worker. And so at that time, it was in the middle of the night. We got her to a shelter in Vegas that isn't very nice, but we got her somewhere so that we can purchase a flight for her to come into Children of the Night. The next day, I do work a lot. The next day I was working, and I actually picked her up from Burbank Airport. This kid had been beaten up and raped to, I don't know to what measures, but she was hurt. She was hurting so badly that they had to bring a wheelchair to assist her out of the plane and to my car because she could not walk because she was in so much pain in her vaginal area. And so I was supposed to just drop her off at the shelter, but I called the hotline worker and I called Dr. Lois Lee, and I said, I'm taking this kid straight to the emergency room because obviously she didn't get checked out in the emergency room in Las Vegas. And so I brought her to the emergency room, and she got cleaned up and everything. And she came to our program, and she ended up being pregnant, and so forth. And that's just one of the things that we do. Within 24 hours, we had her into our program. And Children of the Night works off of word of mouth. Carissa, who's been to our program, you know, she was mentoring a kid and didn't know where to, you know, tell this kid where to go and how to, you know, who to attend. And she called us, and that's where we came in. And right now this kid's not with us because we are a structured program. And sometimes a kid needs to hit rock bottom several times. Even though this kid had been beaten up several times, the program wasn't fit for her at this time. So she went back to San Diego, and she is in a foster home right now. But we are still providing her educational. We are still mailing her, you know, educational programs, and we are going back and forth with her. She's going to be taking her GED. We're going to pay for that GED. We're going to make sure that she has transportation to that GED, whether it's providing a taxi cab service. And that's just one of the things that we do. And then we can move on to Deb, who also referred a child to us who actually came from Vegas as well, but she's from Los Angeles. She came to us, and she was a miracle. Phenomenal child. She came in, she had on thigh-high boots, a suede black dress. You would think that she was 20-something years old walking down the streets, and she wasn't. She was 17 years old and crying for help, but didn't even realize that she was crying for help. She came in, She, you know, had a wall, but within 72 hours, she was saying, oh, I'm lactose intolerant. I need to go to the emergency room because I have a cut on my finger, because she realized within 72 hours that her medical attention is being met. Never once could she have told her mom, my stomach hurts, or my head hurts. It wouldn't have mattered, but she realized within 72 hours that every single need that she needed or was going to get met, no matter what it was. And today, several months later, she's in a transitional living program in Orange County. She completed her GED, received her high school diploma within a matter of 3 months at our program. She's going to go to community college, and we're going to provide for her books. We're going to provide her a laptop or a computer, depending on what we have at the shelter. And we're always going to be there. I just overnighted her some medications yesterday. And she's doing phenomenal. Going on to Judge Groman. Judge Groman, I went to her court, I guess it was 2 years ago. Time just flies. And, you know, when I went in her court is in South Central, correct? And it's in South Central, and she deals with rough kids. But it doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean anything. You know, these kids are rough because they built that skin. The way Carissa mentioned that she was mean to people who were nice to her, and she was nice to people who were mean to her. The only reason that is because they've learned how to, they know how to react to someone who's mean rather than someone who's nice to them. They don't know how to react to that. They're confused, so they rather stay in a comfort zone. We all stay in comfort zones because it's easier. And I remember picking up, the last kid I remember from Judge Groman's court was this kid, Nicole, well, I don't want to say her last name. She came, and I picked her up, and her story was just, all the stories are amazing in a bad way or a good way, but I've become more fascinated with how smart these kids are. These kids are smart, and these kids just need the right path. They need right people, not curious people. When Carissa was talking to that radio personnel, he asked her, is there, I mean, I'm just chopping it up, but is there, you could have helped yourself. At 12 years old, you know how to help yourself? And it was more of an understatement. And you see a lot of people who become more curious rather than helpful, because it's a really, really thin line. People start to want to know, how much did you make? Where did you go? What were the streets? It becomes more of a curious thing. And we have a 40-hour training before our staff comes on board, and we tell them there's no street talk. You don't talk to the kids about the streets, because once you do, they are going to put you in the category as a customer, which is a trick. And once they categorize you as a customer, you no longer have their respect. They are going to manipulate you like no other. Because that's what they've learned. That's their safe net. And so I've been there for many years, and I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to see Judge Groman again. And when I met her, I was very intimidated, and then I just read her bio, and I realized she was from Brooklyn. and I'm from Brooklyn. People always say I have tough skin. I was like, man, I guess that's what it is. And Carissa, I met her many, many years ago, and every time I see her, it always brings tears to my eyes, because I know that there is hope, there's always inspiration. And I always tell the kids, they call me all kind of names, bad names, but that's because I never pity them. I always push them because I know what they're capable of doing. I don't baby them. When they finish a class, when they accomplish something, that's when I give them a pat on the back. I don't sympathize with them because they've been raped 7 times. You categorize yourself as a victim, you're going to never recover. I learned in my gender and sex communication class that a person who was raped, a woman who was kidnapped, was titled a victim, but she escaped. How is she still considered a victim? She escaped. She's a hero. She's telling her story. Once you categorize yourself as a victim, what are the traits of a victim? Depression, sobbing, you can't wake up in the morning, you want to sleep all day. And so if I categorize our residents at Children of the Night as victims, they're not going to be able to grow. I tell them they're heroes every day, And every day is another day going, because they got many more days to come. So, I'm from Children of the Night, and there you have it.
Can you kind of describe what we've learned about the scope of the problem in LA over the last year or so?
First, I want to thank everybody who's here tonight. I appreciate the interest that the National Council is showing in this issue. And Jen, thank you for bringing us all here tonight. It would be dishonest for me to sit next to Carissa and not say for myself that I've had similar experiences. And I feel very blessed to be where I am today. But not all our young people have the wherewithal to be able to pull themselves up like Carissa and I have. And so getting back to the situation, it's interesting. There was a young public defender in my courtroom who was very emotional about a case that was in my court. A young woman or a young girl who was charged with prostitution yet again. And despite the fact that I myself had found myself in that position, I actually expected from that girl what I was capable of doing, which is just not right. And the public defender got very angry with me, and for good reason. And that sort of put me on the course of trying to be a bit more empathetic about the situation that a lot of our girls and boys find themselves in. I think it was just sort of fortuitous that I had run into Maureen Pacheco, who was formerly with the Public Defender's Office. Maureen, are you here by any chance? Okay. Formerly with the Public Defender's Office and now at Loyola University running a law clinic, and she told me about the committee that Debbie Dean, and I see Emilio's in the back, Emilio Mendoza from the Department of Children and Family Services, that they were heading a subcommittee that was run by ICANN, the Interagency Child Abuse Network. And I think that I came in just in the formative stages, and because I was still feeling guilty about that girl who was in my court, I actually volunteered to be the chair of what they call the domestic trafficking subgroup of the subcommittee. So in the last couple of years, I've been working with these fabulous people, and there's a number of the fabulous people that I've been working with here. I see Misty Ward, who's a children's services worker with the Runaway program. She's out on the streets every day working with these girls. And forgive me, are any of your colleagues here with you? So we have 4 social workers who are working with those youth in the street. And they could tell you there are approximately 300 of the youth from the Department of Children and Family Services. These are youth who are placed in foster homes and group homes that are runaways every single month. And it's their charge to work with these kids and to try, and they're not actually the case-carrying social workers, they are the secondary social workers, but they understand what's going on with these kids, and they try to help them to find a place for themselves. So, and I remember at one of the meetings, one of the lawyers for the children was talking about the runaway issue, and I just realized for myself that this is a key issue. We've got to help these kids not run away, and from the very first time that they show any kind of runaway behavior, I think we need to address that. And I'm glad that you're all here because we really need the community behind us. We need every single one of you to reach out to young kids who are having trouble in their homes, because that's where it all starts. Problems in the home that lead them to run away, abuse and neglect that's going on that's not being reported, trauma that they suffered in the hands of some adult that hasn't been dealt with. And this is what causes our young people to go out on the street. And once they're out on the street, they have to engage in behaviors to survive and find themselves caught up in situations that they can't get out of. My dream, and I didn't actually finish going around the room, but Michelle Guyman is here from probation, and I really want to acknowledge Michelle for all the work that she and Hanya Cardenas have been doing on behalf of probation to work on a program to divert or at least to support our youth who are involved in this situation. You know, right now, these young people are being prosecuted as criminals. And instead of having their needs addressed as victims, they're coming through the juvenile justice system because nobody knows what else to do with them. And they're coming through the juvenile justice system and they're being locked up in juvenile hall. When they show runaway behaviors, that's their method of coping with structure. They run away 2 or 3 times. They end up going to a probation camp where there are kids who have committed robberies, assault with deadly weapons, brutal crimes, and these young people who are suffering are there locked up with other youth who are truly criminal. And so my dream, and I have a lot of people who are here today who are involved in our committee who are working on this, and Hanya and Michelle are very active in putting together a safe house that other communities have, such as Phoenix, and maybe Michelle will have a few minutes to talk about those programs. But they've been, Hanya and Michelle have been to Phoenix and Dallas and Las Vegas looking at other programs that currently exist. But the problem is that there is no one program that does everything that we want it to do. And this is something that you all can help us with. I think, was it Phoenix that raised their own money, the faith-based community, raised the money themselves to start a safe house for young people. And especially in a day when government budgets are being cut, we're going to be looking more and more to faith-based community and organizations such as National Council of Jewish Women to provide the support that is necessary to help these young people. We don't lock up other youth who are doing things to themselves. You know, we have hospital holds for youth who are suicidal, but we don't put them into jail. And that's our response right now, is to put these kids into jail and hope that if we keep them long enough, we're going to keep them from hurting themselves. But, you know, we all know that that's not going to work. And after the 6 months is over in camp, they're just going to be back out on the street doing the same thing. So, I think I kind of rambled a little bit there, Judge Levine, but...
well, I think we should hear from Debbie Dean too, because you've been working in Los Angeles for a long time before we even were aware of the problem. And I'd love to hear some of the things that the FBI is doing now and what you've learned.
Actually, I'm going to kind of take 2 different topics. The first, I want to talk briefly about both the issue of domestic trafficking versus the foreign national kids that are brought into this country and then trafficked. And in the course of what we're talking about now with commercial and sexually exploited kids, we'll kind of leave aside labor trafficking, which is another whole issue involved under the federal law for human trafficking. And because it's been a long day, I've been at it since 4 in the morning, I'm going to start out by just reading the federal human trafficking law, because I really want you to kind of know the basics of that, and it's pretty short. Basically, under the Trafficking Victim Protection Act of 2000, it defines federally severe forms of trafficking in persons as sex trafficking in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform the act has not attained 18 years of age, or the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose or subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. So that's basically, there's a lot of other federal laws. California now has a state law on human trafficking. There's a lot of choices that we have now that didn't happen when I first started working as a crime victim advocate back in the 1980s. And we actually prosecuted human trafficking cases, and I had juveniles that were brought into this country from Thailand and were forced to work in massage parlors, and this was happening in the 1980s and 1990s. And believe me, it was a lot different world then to try to find services for my kids at that time than it is if I was faced with a similar kind of problem now. And here in LA, we did have such a case. Just 4 or 5 years ago, we had a case where young girls were being brought in to work in brothels from Guatemala. And this was a federal prosecution, got a lot of big news. And actually, what was interesting about that is the women basically were the pimps in that case. A lot of the families were threatened back in Guatemala. When we were involved in the rescues of those kids, and it literally was a rescue, and it was one of the first times that we had the opportunity to work with DCFS and Emilio's great group, MART. But we actually, when the teams went into the different houses where the girls were being held, the locks were being locked from the outside so that it was locking the girls into there. And I think that was when Los Angeles certainly realized that the human trafficking issue we have does involve children that are foreign national kids. In that case, our Child Protective Services group was able to find great foster homes for those kids. Some of them are still in those foster homes, going to school, having just a great time, and taking advantage of the legal remedies that are available to them. As a victim of who's a foreign national, there are all kinds of services available, including what they call a T visa. And that's a special kind of visa that victims of trafficking can get based on certain criteria to stay in the country and cooperate with law enforcement and go on. And there's all kinds of services and things. But I just want you to be aware that that is kind of a particular type of trafficking that there is. What we're seeing much more or have identified, probably since we've really been working on this, is more the domestic minors. And those are the kids that are legal residents or citizens of the United States that are involved in trafficking. And those are the kids, you know, where they're under the control of a pimp or that kind of thing for the most part. What we're seeing in LA happening a lot with these kind of kids, and what I'm a part of, and what Emilio Mendoza and Michelle Guyman, we're kind of the 3 prongs of, we call ourselves, I guess, the social service response team to the Innocence Lost Task Force. And what that is, there's a group of law enforcement agents. Right now it involves FBI, we've got Los Angeles Vice, we've got the district attorneys and investigator from their office. A sheriff's representative has just been invited on board, and Cal DOJ. And those agents are out, we go out usually a couple times a month. After we work our day jobs, we're called back out to meet maybe 7 at night, 10 at night. Emilio will get some of his social workers in. We've had Misty in before in her group. But we're out there, and then we respond. Law enforcement goes out, and they actually go on the different tracks. And there's several different tracks around LA. And these undercover cops or our agents will just patrol the different tracks looking for underage girls. And as they identify those underage girls, or they're starting to branch out and work a lot with local law enforcement who's aware of this team now and will sometimes call us when they find a young girl, we will go out and Michelle and Emilio and I, we're either on call or we're down waiting in one of the police departments for them to bring the girls in, literally. And what the agents will do is try to get as much identification on the kids as we can. And meanwhile, we're kind of, you know, emailing information to each other about what we know is name, date of birth, all kinds of information, trying to find out, is this a kid with Child Protective Service history? Is this a kid with probation history? Are there warrants on the kids? Are there things that we should know about them? Are they a danger to themselves? Or, you know, is mom in the picture? Is mom not in the picture? What kind of things are going on in there? So that the agents have that information when they do the interviews. And every attempt is made at that time to find out what they can, where they came from, what they've been involved in to the extent that they can, knowing that often these kids are not going to tell in the very beginning much, usually about their parents at all. Sometimes they don't even give their correct names. A lot of these kids don't even have ID. It's been taken from them, or they never had it to begin with. So again, you're just working, trying to start almost from scratch and trying to figure out who they are and where they best belong. And where our group comes in is after they've done that initial law enforcement interview, we'll try to figure out what's the best place for that placement for that child. Is it a child that is a probation kid? If so, are they in a probation foster home? Can they go home to their parent? Emilio's group is busy deciding if it is appropriate for them to go back in the home. They're going to escort that child to the home and make sure that it's a safe home to return to. If it's a kid that's got warrants out, they may end up going back through probation, but the determination is made. Along with that, we're also ensuring that there's follow-up services to the extent that we can with these kids. Now, some of them will run, some of them will move on, but to the extent that we can, we're really trying to follow up with intensive services, mental health. Most of these kids, but when I talk with them, what they want is jobs. A lot of them are looking for jobs. So, that's one of the big things, trying to make sure that they've got those things. One of the things that was put on your chair that we'd love to have your help in, and actually this kind of goes to what Judge Groman had kind of asked when we talked about the support from the faith community, and what we're looking for is support as well as leadership. We're kind of asking everybody that we run into, especially under our ICANN group, who it's called an action sheet. If any of you are interested, or you have agencies that are interested in working on this issue, or you're already working on it, and we may not know about you, we're asking you to fill out this sheet of paper, tell us what you can do or what you're willing to do, and we're going to put together a big resource guide for all of LA County about this. So whether it's fundraising, whether it's grant writing, whether it's transportation, whatever it is that you can do to assist on these kids, make sure I get this form at the end of the evening, or you can send it to me later. But this is a way that we can really show that LA cares and trying to build up a network to help these kids in every way that we can. I'll just stop with that.
I've received a number of questions, really excellent questions from the audience. I'd like to try and address some of them.
Yeah, before we get some questions, I just wanted to actually clear some things up really quickly. I just want to clear it up really quickly that I just heard some of the panelists discussing some things, and me working for Children of the Night, which is the first shelter that developed that deals with children involved in prostitution. I say prostitution because when you see a child, you tell them human trafficking, they're not going to understand what that is. We're dealing with American children. They're involved in prostitution. It is what it is. You ask our kids, have you been human trafficked? They look at you with the confusion. We're talking to kids, we're not talking to adults. We're in the business for raising children, and so we call it prostitution. They're exploiting children who are involved in prostitution. And then second, I know that Judge Groman said there aren't any programs that fulfill all the sectors, but Children of the Night has actually a phenomenal program that deals with education, case management, and an alumni service program. That we pay for people we're paying for Oxygen, who was one of the first people who slept on Dr. Lois Lee's floor when she was writing her dissertation paper in the 1970s. And also with the FBI, Debbie, yes, in 1980s, the early 1970s, 80s, even early 1990s, kids involved in prostitution, those were the kids who'd fallen through the cracks. And that's why Children of the Night developed, because Child Protective Services didn't touch them and probation didn't touch them. Where do you put these kids? And that's how Dr. Lois Lee started and developed her program from that. Also, I don't know if you guys realize, there was a young lady on the corner of Fairfax, 2 blocks away from this building, wearing pink spandex and a black leotard. She was a child prostitute. I don't know if you realize that who she was. She was standing on the corner, and that was a kid involved in prostitution. and it's not for material things, and it's for sanctuary. It's because they need a roof over their head. They need certain things. And so my biggest issue is that when you do see a child involved in prostitution in America, it's prostitution. Human trafficking was developed recently. And if we're in the business for raising children, we need to be able to talk to them directly, and they need to understand what we're saying. Otherwise, if they cannot understand what you're saying, they're going to tune out and continue on with whatever they're doing. So that's all.
I just want to add that FADWA, Children of the Night, is kind of an oasis. It's in fact the only facility that does what it does. They have they have a residence where kids from the street can live there and receive the kind of treatment that FADWA is talking about, and education, counseling, and help them get the support they need. But what we're trying to do is build within our existing social services and judicial system a more systemic response to kids, which does not criminalize them, but rather which helps them in the ways the Children of the Night helps them, but we can respond to more kids than this one agency can. I've got a lot of questions, Carissa, for you. They kind of boil down to what your relationship's like with your mom and your dad today. How did you process anger issues? And how were you so brave to be so straightforward in sharing your story with people? And kind of...
Three's all I can handle.
Okay.
Thanks, FADWA, too. I have to give props because Lois was one of the first people that David helped me find when we were first making the film, and I went to see her for the strength, some of that strength to go out and tell my story publicly. She didn't approve of it. She did not approve of it, but the cameras had already been rented and we were already making the film. But she warned me. She said, you know, it's going to get harder as you go along this. I think I went into it a bit naively when I started telling my story, and definitely brazen and just, you know, I'm going to do this. And I felt deep within myself that I had been a visitor to that place and not really a resident. Like the labeling that went on, I didn't label myself as a victim. Maybe that was because Ron came into my life so early, and Mrs. W, and they told me I had potential, and I saw I was doing algebra, and there were counselors in my juvenile hall that could not even look at that book without going cross-eyed, you know? So it gave me a lot of confidence, and I didn't categorize myself, you know, and that's really important point. And so when I started telling the story, I visited Children of the Night. I got some strength and some support from Lois, who became a mentor of mine, and I got to start working with amazing FADWA and see what she was doing and help, you know, mentor kind of around these issues, because I didn't know what I was dealing with when I started mentoring the girls. One of the first girls that I met, she was in Eastlake, and I was just there with a poetry volunteer, Inside Out Writers. It was Inside Out Writers, and they asked me to come and show some of the documentary. And one of the girls came in late, and she saw the video there, and it was titled Carissa, and she started crying, and she said, "That's my name too." And it was just overwhelming because she was the first survivor that I had met that was a young child, and she was open to me because we shared the same name. And it was really powerful, and I did everything I could for her. I didn't leave that facility because she also needed medical care, and I know that some of the requirements by law when the kids come into juvenile hall, they are asked a series of questions like about STDs and things. They just lie. They know how to lie, you know? And the only person she was going to tell about this very embarrassing, shameful thing she was suffering from was me. And so I stayed with her, and she was so smart. When we got to the hospital, finally got the nurse to issue her, to the emergency room. Finally got the nurse to see her, and then get her to the emergency room, and she saw this little pamphlet about being a health advocate. And here I'm like a law student, and she goes, "You're my health advocate." So then I got to, talk to the doctors and help her, and it was really scary, everything we came across. I couldn't believe it. She was only 15, and we were trying to report some of this stuff to the cops and the sheriff's office. They were rude, mean to her. I had to pull out my, law school card and push them away and say, "You can't talk to her like that." And I truly had to be an advocate because they were damaging her. They were doing more harm with the way they were talking to her, and it seemed so basic to me, so human and inhuman. Like, what are you doing? You're hurting her. Back off. And the way they even just looked at her was very difficult for me to process. And the doctor knew what was going on, and she said, "This is never good when the police come. It never is good." And I think that's what we're talking about is, I'm kind of straying away from the question, sorry, but that's a personal experience. That young girl helped me keep going. Even though she went to Children of the Night, we got her on the phone with Children of the Night, and while she was in the facility, she went there. Unfortunately, someone wouldn't let me see her and give her clothing before she got to Children of the Night. She needed her own clothes. She had lied about her age, gone to jail. Clothes didn't come with her. They were street clothes. She didn't want them. So they were going to send her pretty raggedy, and her hair wasn't done. I brought her a hat. I brought her all this stuff. And no one in the court would let me give her the stuff. I was standing there, and I told this supervising public defender, I said, "I have this backpack," and it was a UCLA backpack, it was all cute. And one of my really good friends, Carol Biondi, had donated this money, and I bought all this clothes for her, and I want to take her even more shopping, but these are just for right now, and here they are. And he said, "Can't you see that nobody wants you here?" And I said, "Carissa wants me here, and that's all that matters." And I looked over at my friend who was driving me around, because I had also been studying for exams the night before, and I looked at Michelle, and she looked at me, and she just couldn't believe what this person was doing. He would not let me give her the clothes. And so I wasn't able to get to her in time and just comfort her a little bit, in that transition. And it was really sad. And she would call me from motels along the way, and I would call the FBI, and I would say, "You know what, I see in this budget that you got money, millions of dollars, to help me. So I need somebody to go to this motel that this girl's calling me from, that she's 15, and go pick her up. She needs help." And they would laugh. I mean, that's how it was, 5 years ago when we started making this film. That's how it was. I had no one I could call. I went to the legislation. I would call the hotline number. I got to speak to the most intelligent people who knew this issue back and forth. But as far as people on the ground who knew what to do, I was not going in that motel. Okay, I had already been back to the motels with David for the film, and I was broken down from that. So it's so important that we all embrace this and learn and share this information, because when you make the call, it's that viral thing, if people can respond, and it's more than just money. It's really action. So about my family. When we made the film, I wasn't talking to my mom, and I hadn't talked to my dad my real biological dad, for about 5 years. And, it was a mixture of things. When I started law school, I basically told everybody no drama. When I first started law school, I told my family, I said, "You know what, I'm just kind of withdrawing because I need to get through law school." And law school is really stressful, and I applaud anybody who gets through it, because it's I was giving the hives again. It was the first time. Being on the streets in law school, same level of stress. So I had to go to therapy, and it was the only way the hives would go away, is if I started talking about this stuff and getting it out. Because we would talk in criminal law about rape, and you'd hear these people that never even came close to rape, besides in a movie where it's dramatized, and they were talking about it like they knew something about it, and I was feeling the rape again. So I needed to get it out. I got it out. David helped me in such a huge way to get it out in such a big way. And that's how I was motivated, and I got through it, and I was strong, is because I knew I had to help those Carissas, the other ones that were still out there. And I continue to try to do that, and I do a lot of self-care now because I deteriorated while we were making the film. I gained weight, I was depressed, I was crying, I became a victim because that's what people started to see me as. Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Don't be sorry for me. I got to UCLA. Now I'm going to be okay. So it was, you know, I went from feeling really empowered to feeling like a victim, and I didn't know all this psychology, and that's what Lois meant when she said it was going to get worse. So now I live in a quiet, small village on the coast, and I take care of myself, and everyone's like, why aren't you in LA working at a law firm? I'm like, no. And I have amazing opportunities, and like this one right here, to continue to share my story because I re-energize, I think, because I do the self-care, which is important for all of you because vicariously you will get stressed if you start to deal with this issue, or any teenager. So then my mom and dad, wasn't talking to them. My mom, I worked on forgiving her for probably about 3 years. And the first time I heard the word forgive, I really started to process forgive, it was like that word potential. It was like, what does that really mean? You know, it seems like I just can't forgive her. It's not a magic wand. That won't do anything for me internally. So I really processed forgiveness, and I realized that it was really about me. It wasn't about her, and that it was about acceptance and love and just grace. And I found that. And my mom actually went to my baptism recently, and she invited. I had opened it up because, you know, I wanted her to know she was welcome if she wanted to come, and she came, and that was a huge deal for her to come. And she was really, you know, I got to sit next to her and be next to her, and my godparents were there and everything, but it was really cool to be able to be in that relationship with her and to kind of be helping her along now. My dad needs help too now. After Father's Day, we just heard from him again. He disowned me probably about 2.5 years ago because he got mad, drunk and mad, and disowned me when I was there to visit him in Portland. And I just left it at that. I left it alone, and now he's kind of reaching out again. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going away for a couple of weeks to an amazing place to do trainings and stuff, and so I figure I'll come back a little refreshed, and I'll figure it out then. Okay, sorry, that was a lot.
Let me just quickly answer. We got a few questions about male prostitution projects, and I just want to say all of the services that are available at Children of the Night and other places in the city are open to male prostitutes. And my actual first experience with a child involved in prostitution was a child in my court who was a foster child who was actually a male prostitute and kept running away from his foster homes and going back on the street. And he went to Children of the Night, and basically they saved him. And he reestablished relationships with his sister and his mother, and he went off my caseload. So that was a good story. Okay, and then I gave Judge Groman a couple of questions I thought she could handle better than myself.
The first question is, what is the prevalence of LGBT youth on the streets, and are there unique services for them? So let me just say that LGBT stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender youth. In terms of the number of youth who are homeless on the streets, there is a very, very high percentage of LGBT youth there because their families kick them out, or they feel forced to leave home. So you'll find a higher proportion of LGBT youth who are homeless living on the streets. Are there unique services for them? This is kind of separate from the sexually exploited children's issue that we're dealing with. But there are committees that are working on addressing the needs of LGBT youth. I think one of the most important things we can do to help our LGBT youth is to work with their families to accept them. Even if it's a little bit of acceptance, it goes a long way. I think that in the past that we looked at LGBT youth as having to emancipate, grow up, be off on their own because we kind of wrote off their families. But now there's a movement towards working with families to show some acceptance and love, which goes a long way. In terms of unique services, to me that's something that's real important, to work on the family acceptance. And I also want to take this opportunity, since I have the microphone, to let Fadwa know that I hold Lois Lee and the staff at Children of the Night in such high regard because of the work that you do. And Judge Levine was correct in stating that what we're talking about in terms of not having a process that incorporates everything that we need is because of the systems, the juvenile justice system and the social services, and also law enforcement, because there are a lot of kids out there who aren't brought to the attention of authorities, to social workers, to the juvenile justice system. One of the police officers who was at a meeting of ours was talking about the fact that it takes a long time to process a juvenile, and they have to spend hours processing a juvenile, and they would just as soon let the juvenile go so that they don't have to be involved in all the paperwork that goes along with it. And so with the number of youth who there are actually charges filed against, our numbers are averaging about 150 a year. Well, we know that there are so many more kids out there who aren't being made part of the system. They really should go to the Department of Children and Family Services and not through probation. And I just want to shout out to Karen Vance and Ziamara Flores Holguin, who I see here, who do exactly that, working with the youth to help them through the right system, which is the Department of Children and Family Services. So, did you want me to answer the other question? Okay. Do you think the old runaway statute, which is Welfare Institutions Code 601, should be resuscitated? Well, it still exists. Welfare Institutions Code Section 601, it's used for truants, what they call incorrigible youth. But there isn't really very much teeth in that system that you couldn't get out of the social services, the dependency system, and the probation system. So I don't really know that it's a solution to go through that, but it is another mechanism that doesn't criminalize the behavior. So I think that, you know, it's a possibility.
Can I just address that, because you had handed me that card, so I read the question for a second. It's really dangerous to have code sections in a row because kids know how to count. So 601, I always knew what came next. Thank you. So 602 is when you violate a criminal code and you're officially going to get, you know, probation or locked up. And 601 is kind of like, oh, we're putting you in the chute, you know, you're going there. We can see where you're going with this behavior. I think it changed the services I would have received. If I was labeled a 300, if I was in the Welfare Institution Code 300, I would have went to foster homes instead of group homes. And that's a huge issue because you are looking for a sense of family. And that is very different. It's very different at a group home. I think, you know, Children of the Night, they're in the business of raising children. They've made that feel like a home. You don't have to do chores. They actually have, you know, some cleaning people that come in. They do little chores, but they're not, you know, they're not mopping the floors and these huge, you know, and they're not treated the same way as, you know, the group home stuff is. So it's very, you know, the 300 I think is a very better way to go.
What is the phone number for Children of the Night?
It's 1-800-551-1300. There are flyers at the front, I believe Jennifer or Jen.
Yeah, on that front table in the lobby on the way out.
Okay, so there's information in the lobby for those of you who wanted that kind of contact information about Children of the Night. And then someone asked what should be done if you notice a child on the street who you think may be involved in prostitution, and Debbie's going to handle that.
Yeah, I know that everyone would love to go out and say, oh, here, and here's my handout I got from Children of the Night with the 800 number, and gosh, I wish that was a safe thing to tell you all to do. But at this point, it's probably not a real good idea, because for every child that's out there on the street, that pimp is watching that child somewhere. Going out and approaching that child can be a very dangerous thing to do if you don't know what you're doing or not part of a trained group to be doing that. So my best guess to tell you at this point is to notify law enforcement and let them know. There are some organized groups. There's actually some faith-based groups going down in the Compton area and some other places that have big barbecues in an empty parking lot, and the police are kind of referring the underage kids to them, and they're doing some great interventions. So there's some programs going, but it's all working with the sheriff's office or working with law enforcement so that they do it in a really safe way. Other things that kind of fits with the question about how can we deal with the demand for sexual services for children be curtailed. There's a great website also. It's called sharedhope.org. They are dealing strongly, and I think Children of the Night, other kinds of groups are looking at the whole issue of demand. And I think a lot of people are coming down and realizing that a lot of this is we need to be doing more with pimps and with the Johns. There's billboard campaigns. Atlanta has a really big one right now. Their mayor is really involved in kind of saying, not with our kids. I think there's a lot of things that we could be doing as a grassroots kind of thing to help curtail this demand. LA actually has a John school for Johns that are arrested for this kind of thing. So there's things starting to happen and percolate, and it's going to grow bigger and bigger. But again, the best way to get involved is put that down on your call to action sheet. It's something you're interested in, and as we can get groups growing throughout LA, that's what we'll be working on.
Yeah.
I'm loud, sorry.
That's okay.
I have something to say. John School makes my skin crawl. Every time I hear that. I mean, I've done the research, I've looked at it. It's like this petty fine, and it's like $500, and you go to these John schools, and then you're paying for somebody to be on the law enforcement team, some part-time person. Basically, you're paying a salary. So law enforcement has a vested interest in keeping this John School thing going. But we should own their cars. Yes. We should own their houses. We should take all their property, because you know what? They're not Johns, they're pedophiles. And they are traffickers. And there are federal laws that say we can take everything they use to traffic those kids. So, period. End of story. I mean,
they do that in some states. Well, in cities too. They do that in San Francisco. They confiscate the cars.
And also in San Francisco, it's great because a lot of, different cities have different amounts of money that go to victim funds and different things like that. And, I'm just saying that there's a lot of programs going on out there that are starting to address the demand issue in different ways. We need to do more.
Okay, I'm getting the time's up signal, but I did get a note from Jeff Griffith from the Youth Center. He says that the LA Gay and Lesbian Center has a program for homeless and runaway youth also. So I think
the drop-in center for that is right here on Fairfax and Santa Monica.
Great.
Real quick, too, I'd like to mention one other program, and that's the Mary Magdalene Center. And that actually is a program for adult women that are involved in prostitution. It's a 2-year program. Another really worthwhile one, you can find their number online. They also have a drop-in center that's actually up in the San Fernando Valley. So a great resource, again, for women that may not be quite ready to leave the life, but still need the kind of services and support they can get from that. Other programs, again, are starting to come up. Again, we're at the infancy in how we're dealing with this, so there's all kinds of opportunities to get involved along the way.
And I just want to make 2 points, moderator's prerogative. One is this call to action sheet. If you read it carefully, it has a very wide variety of things that you can do that, call on a lot of different talents and capabilities. So I think it's great for people who want to get involved. And then the second thing is that I just want to echo what other panelists said about Jen Baranoff's role. Put together a group of people who are extremely knowledgeable on all the different aspects of this situation. So thanks, Jen.
And hopefully this will move us all to action. Isn't that our goal?
Yes.
Okay.
Didn't get those sheets.
There aren't any more, I'm sorry.
The call to action.
I want to thank everyone on the panel, Jen, but I'd also like you to look around this room. You're in a room that's full of paintings made by students at Alexandria House. This is like the first step. It's a place for them to come after school so they're not on the streets. So when you have time, just when you're leaving, look at these paintings and see the kind of work that can be done in a semi-institutional settings where we show students and young people that we care about them. Thank you all so much for coming.